When I first met him, I had no idea how much he would change my life. I was all of 24, the age where most of us are exploring new things, or in my case, doing rather silly things. My parents weren't particularly happy with this meeting, and I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. It was something completely new to me. I had never done anything like this before. So going in, I was nervous as hell. My hands were trembling like they are right now. My heartbeat was so fast, and I was so afraid, like it was almost like a fear or flight response, okay? So when I first saw him, when I laid eyes on him, I couldn't really say it was love at first sight. In fact, I really did contemplate running away. But, in my moment of youthful indiscretion, I decided to stay on, and stay I did. And after a while, I realized that it wasn't so bad after all. It wasn't like what I thought it would be. In fact, it was almost magical. I had fallen in love. And this is Cuba, the ball python who stole my heart and changed my perception about snakes forever. Now, talking about ball pythons, I actually had one right here. Does anybody see it somewhere? No, I'm not kidding. I really had one. Oh, there you are. Hi. Hello. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, meet Arrow. This is obviously not Cuba. I couldn't bring him here, right? He's still in the zoo. But this is Arrow, another ball python just like Cuba. So there started my whole love affair with reptiles. I started working at the Singapore Zoo, and on my very first day at work, I was so excited. It was the best job I'd ever had, right? So I walked in there, and they gave me a broom and a dustpan and asked me to go clean an otter's enclosure. Now, I've always thought otters are extremely adorable, so I was really, really excited. And walking in, I went in there and all enthusiastically stood there for a second, and I thought I was going to faint and die, because it was the most awful smell I have ever felt in my entire life. Now, if you think fish as food is bad enough, then fish as feces, let's just not even go there, okay? I think it was a true test to see if I would really stick on, or anybody could stick on in this job, and stick on I did for 6 years. Now, over the course of 6 years, I interacted with a lot of animals, from birds to mammals to reptiles. But of course, none of the species held my fascination as much as these snakes did. Every time I brought them out like this to meet public, people would always be afraid or anxious, and they wouldn't want to approach me. They don't want to touch them. They often have very weird or funny questions or misconceptions about snakes. And that got me thinking, why do people have this fear or this dislike for snakes? What have these poor creatures done that deserve this bad, that make them have this bad reputation? So I took it upon me as a personal mission to kind of educate myself and then more people about why snakes are actually not as bad as they may seem. So when I thought about it a little more, growing up, all of us are exposed to a lot of things on social media or in mainstream media, right? Snakes are always vilified. They're made to be the evil characters. They're always the villains in all sorts of movies, like the Slytherin house sigil or Medusa's hair, Nagini in Harry Potter, or, even Kaa in the Jungle Book, with their awfully dramatized tongue flicks, flaming red eyes, massive fangs. They're always made to be the bad guys. Now, let's not even talk about the Anaconda kind of movies, right? Because they are over the top, exaggerated to the point that it is hilarious. Now, also, being a scientist at one point of time in my life, I started thinking about a scientific reason behind why we are actually afraid of snakes. And I thought it could be an evolutionary trait. And when I was reading a lot of papers, I did come across the fact that, fear causes us to be cautious, and that reduces risk-taking behavior, right? So the lesser risk-taking behaviors we do, obviously we save ourselves and survive. So on an evolutionary past, I think snakes, they were a risk or a danger to our lives, and hence we decided, or we learned, to be afraid of them. However, a very interesting study recently done by the University of Queensland actually argues otherwise. They say that because of the exposure of all these negative things about snakes in media, it's actually a learned fear and not necessarily an evolutionary fear. Now, what they did was very interesting. They took two groups of people, one group of crazy people like me who love snakes, who have hobbyists, are herpetologists, and another group of people who had absolutely no exposure to snakes. Now, what they did did was flash them with a bunch of pictures of varying animals with a snake in there also, of course, and they were asked to identify what was the most threatening image amongst that. Now, the interesting thing to note is that both groups obviously found the snakes the fastest, but the group which had exposure to snakes did not have a negative emotional response attached to it, whereas the group that did not have any exposure to snakes actually showed a fearful response. Now, this goes to show that if you can actually learn fear, you can most certainly unlearn it, right? Now, reptiles have they been at the bottom of the popularity ladder everywhere, but more so especially where I work currently in India, where there are a lot of myths and superstitions associated with snakes, leading them to be killed on sight. Now, today in India, 50,000 people die every single year due to snake bites. Now, when you look at that figure, you might think that snakes are dangerous. Yes, what are you talking about? But no, there are so many other factors behind them that cause this, right? Like, for one, people are not educated enough, or they don't know the knowledge, so they sleep on the floor outside, and they constantly come into contact with nocturnal snakes. Two, they could actually have their houses untidy, which causes rats to come in. Rats come in search of snakes, and there you go. We don't have a good formula there either. And also, a lot of people don't believe in anti-venom. The only way you can survive a venomous snake bite is by getting a shot of anti-venom. But a lot of people in rural India do not have the education or the knowledge to know that they should go to a hospital. Even if they do want to go to a hospital, the roads and infrastructure are so bad that reaching a hospital is really quite a tiresome task by itself. And even if they do reach the hospital, there's not enough anti-venom, so their lives are not saved. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to this number being 50,000, and it's not necessarily that snakes are vile or vengeful. Now, stereotypes are something, they're actually an oversimplified idea, right, which is generally believed by a lot of people, but it may not necessarily be true. The same goes with phobia. It's an irrational fear which is blown out of proportion. So what is the thing that you think instantly when you think of snakes? They're vile, they're malicious, they're out to get you, they're going to chase you, hunt you, kill you down. That is really very, very far from reality. Snakes are very shy and elusive animals. The last thing they want to do is attack you. So I wanted to show you something really interesting, because when you approach a snake, right, the first thing it will do is try to show you that it's not happy. So it will hood up, it will hiss, it will bare its fangs, it will rattle its tail, and it'll tell you, listen, I'm not comfortable, you're too close to me, just get away. But if we decide to be silly and move even closer to it, it will obviously strike in self-defense. I wanted to show you this video right here. Let's have a look at this, and then we'll talk about this, okay? Did you see that? If you missed that, we're going to watch that one more time. Yes, did you notice that the snake actually struck with its mouth closed? It's the last thing that is their last warning sign. It's when they're trying to tell you, this is it, you cannot get any closer to me. Do you know a snake uses a lot of energy to produce venom? So it's actually counterproductive for them to inject venom into a human as big as us, because they will never be able to consume us. So snakes are not as vile and malicious as they're made out to be in common mythology. Now, reptiles, I work in the Crocodile Bank currently, and I am the assistant director there, and a huge part of my job is actually breaking stereotypes about snakes. I constantly have to meet people who ask me things like, do they drink milk? Are they wet and slimy to touch? Are they, do they poke your eyes out? Do they have diamonds at the back of their head? No, they don't have any of that, okay? They are poor little animals who are just trying to get along their own little path. Now, this snakebite project that I'm working on is very interesting. So it is actually a project that aims to, it's an education and outreach project, and really education is our biggest hope in this project, because understanding snakes comes from knowing how they behave and what they are actually doing and where they are coming from, right? So in India, what we're trying to do now is to reach out to all these farmers and educate them, like use a net when you sleep outside, use a physical barrier, or, use torchlights when you walk out in the dark. These are the simple things that we're trying to do with our outreach program. And it's not easy, because a lot of them have been steeped in tradition. They don't believe in all these things. And when you come out there and tell them anti-venom is the only way you can get saved, they're most likely not going to believe you. So it is a hard task. But in a country, like for you and I, it's easy to understand, right? We're all educated, and we don't live in an environment where snakes are an actual threat to our lives. But in rural societies, in most developing worlds, snakes are actually a real fact, a real problem or a real threat to lives. And the only way we can do anything about it is educating them and telling them what the right things are to do. Now, when you do see a snake, the first thing I would say is to keep calm and back off, because a snake will not get defensive unless and until you actually go closer to it and try to hit it, right? Or try to provoke it, right? It's actually my boss, Rom Whitaker. I've worked with him for a while now, and he has worked with venomous reptiles for over 40 years. And he always says that you really have to do silly things in order to get bitten by snakes. And that is very true. Like, a snake will never approach you and bite you unless you actually try and provoke it. Now, talking about going back to our snakebite mitigation program, this is a huge program. We're starting off in 6 different states, and the idea is basically to educate and make people understand that, you know, snakes do not necessarily receive or necessarily need this bad and horrible attitude that they have, that people have towards them. In India, the common idea is to kill snakes. But if we were to go about thinking that the only solution to this problem is by killing snakes, we're never going to get there. It's a horrible way to approach this subject, right? Now, the other part of our project is actually improving anti-venom standards, because the quality of anti-venom in India is quite low. So we are trying to raise it up to the WHO standards, and so that we can catch up to other countries around the world who are actually in a much better league when compared to us. So what I'm trying to say today is that let's not look at these snakes as being really evil or mean or vengeful. They are predators. They're so important to our ecosystem. Now, if snakes feed on rats, right? If we don't have snakes, we're going to have a massive rodent control population all around the world. So they're actually doing free rodent control for us. And also the properties of venom are actually not properly studied yet. There are many researches going on right now to study if it could be a possible cure for cancer or diabetes. Now, these are things that are still actually haven't fully been explored. So the potential of venom could actually be that it could be a life-saving resource at some point in time. Now, with all of this in mind, snakes are just predators. They're just doing their daily things. Now, to understand them, we really must look at things from their perspective. It comes from education, learning more about them, seeing them for who they are than what we think they are. Now, today I'm not trying to tell all of you that you must go back and love snakes, go hug them, you know, all of that. No, I'm not trying to say that at all. All I'm trying to say is that let's put in some effort to look at things from their side and understand that maybe we don't necessarily have to fear them, but let's try and respect them. Thank you.